In the far reaches of the Andromeda Galaxy, invisible to even Earth's most powerful telescopes, the homeworld of the Valkyries glimmers like a jewel among the stars, a planet called Talo. It serves as the center of a vast empire ruled by an ancient race of female warriors known as the Valkyra. These women embody strength and discipline, born to fight and conquer. Their society is founded on the principles of honorable warfare and dominance. Over the centuries, they expanded their territory, conquering planets, solar systems, and even entire star clusters. Few races dare to challenge them, and at the forefront of this mighty empire stands General Ariana, a fearsome leader whose name is whispered in awe across the galaxy. With her flowing silver hair, piercing violet eyes, and deep ocean-colored skin, she is a commanding presence. Her impeccable record boasts countless victories led by the god of war, Bor. They have defeated all major opponents at home, leaving no worthy challengers. In this mundane arena, strange tasks have been agreed upon. Sitting in a sleek chair on the silver cruiser, General Ariana regarded her second-in-command, Sora, who smiled in response. Sora was almost as tall as Ariana, her frame clad in gleaming black armor, yet she was hardly perceived as a threat. Their technology is primitive, Ariana remarked. Their defenses are laughable, and they are no better than the lizards we destroyed in the Kroros for Arena. The Earth was just a speck, a little blue, floating in the vastness of space. Ariana reflected on the history of Earth, a planet ravaged by war and conflict, inhabited by a species that barely managed to escape their atmosphere in fragile metal capsules, in stark contrast to the Valkyra, who had mastered faster-than-light travel. Billions of years ago, humans were nothing more than children playing with toys, she mused, her tone playful. They sound so fragile, so insignificant. I wonder how they survive. The other Valkyries on the bridge laughed in agreement. They constantly monitored Earth's communications, transmissions, and signals, finding amusement in humanity's obsession with entertainment, material wealth, and petty conflicts. In contrast, the Valkyries lived for the thrill of battle and the pursuit of victory. Arena, her violet eyes sparkling, declared, "We will visit them. They may not be worthy of our conquest, but it will be interesting to see their faces when they realize how small they are in the grand scheme of the universe." With a simple hand gesture, Arena commanded Valerie to descend. The ship's lively engines glowed as it accelerated toward the planet, a beautiful yet terrifying war machine. As the ship approached the outer atmosphere, it slipped through a void in the cloaking field, passing Earth's defenses undetected. The crew gathered on the bridge, eager for their first glimpse. A holographic image of Earth appeared before them, a swirl of blue oceans, green land, and white clouds. "They're so clueless," Sora laughed, crossing her arms over her chest. "We can kill them all before they know it. But we're in the arena and not interested in destruction. Not before they see us first and feel the weight of our presence." As the stealth force field dissipated, the ship pierced through the atmosphere like a meteor, revealing its slender metallic body. The primitive radar systems on Earth began to spark to life, scrambling military bases and jets to intercept the unidentified object. People looked up in alarm, horror etched across their faces as thousands gazed at the massive spacecraft hovering above them. Some were gripped by fear of the unknown, while others stood stunned, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. At the bow of the ship, Arena observed the small figures below, humans no larger than ants beneath their feet. Filled with amusement, she opened the hatch and commanded in a calm voice. The enormous hatch at the bottom of the ship hissed as it slowly slid open. The Valkyra warriors, with their formidable forms and shining armor, descended the ramp, creating an awe-inspiring spectacle. They moved with grace and strength, each step purposeful, their cold, calculating gazes fixed on the street below. The crowd retreated in fear. Mankind had never seen anything like the Valkyries before. these towering, blue-skinned warriors whose eyes sparkled like stars. A tense silence enveloped the atmosphere. Then, Anna's voice rang out among the citizens of Earth. "We are the Valkyrie Star Conquerors. We have come to see your world, even if it barely merits our attention. Look at us, and know that you are nothing in the grand scheme of the universe." Her words echoed through the streets, triggering waves of fear and confusion among the crowd as the Valkyrie warriors reveled in the humans' horrified reactions. "They are so fragile," Sora whispered, her eyes scanning the crowd with a mixture of pity and amusement. But as Arena continued to survey the throngs of people, something unexpected caught her eye. A figure standing resolutely in the chaos. A man, distinct from the others, regarded them with a calm, almost defiant expression. He did not flee like the others. Instead, he met her gaze with curiosity. "What an interesting scene," she muttered, her curiosity piqued. This person was different. Perhaps Earth was not as miserable as she had initially thought. In the chaos of New York, people screamed and scattered as the massive Valkyra battlecruiser, Valoria, hovered ominously overhead, heralding doom. Helicopters circled cautiously, and sirens blared across the city as police and emergency workers struggled to maintain order. Their efforts seemed futile against the overwhelming presence of the Valkyrie warriors. General Arena stood at the foot of the ramp, her violet eyes scanning her surroundings, flanked by elite guards in gleaming armor that resembled invincible cannons. The gods had descended from the sky, and the humans kept their distance. Yet the air was thick with tension, and the fearful expressions on the crowd's faces delighted the Valkyries. "Look at them," Sora laughed, her voice carrying over the crowd. "They're flailing around like insects." Arena's weak attempt to nod at humanity, as if to establish some semblance of defense, struck Sora as laughable. Arena raised her hand, signaling the Valkyries to unfold. They advanced through the streets, towering over the panicked civilians, scrutinizing the Earthlings like curious animals. The Valkyries had no interest in looting or violence. They deemed Earth too insignificant for full conquest. This was merely a demonstration of their superiority, a lesson to remind these lesser beings of their place in the galaxy. One of the Valkyrie warriors, a fierce fighter named Kara, seized a nearby streetlight and bent it effortlessly with one hand, showcasing her raw strength. The humans recoiled in horror as Kalra carelessly tossed the crushed metal aside, brushing through the crowd. However, a peculiar sensation lingered as the Valkyries taunted the humans, displaying the might of their arena. Arena had sensed earlier that not all Earthlings were as weak and fearful as they seemed. As her gaze swept over the crowd once more, she spotted the man who had drawn her attention before, now separated from the rest. Amidst the chaos, he remained calm, tall for a human, perhaps 6 feet, with a muscular build and sharp features. His dark hair was cropped close, and he wore a casual jacket, as if he hadn't expected to witness an alien invasion that day, despite the palpable terror in the air. His expression remained stable, even curious, as he boldly watched Arena and her soldiers, unflinching while others averted their eyes. Who is this person? Arena wondered. As they approached the humans, she advanced through the crowd, Sora at her side, instinctively forming a wide circle around the Valkyries and the enigmatic man who now stood at their center. For a brief moment, the city fell silent. The weight of Arena's voice echoed down the empty street. "What's your name, inhabitant of Earth?" The man met her gaze without flinching. "David Kane," he replied. He said his voice firm, but calm Arena studied him for a moment, intrigued by his composure. He was different from the others, and there was something about him that stirred a strange sense of curiosity in her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in ages. Most beings cowered in her presence, but this one he seemed almost amused. "You seem remarkably calm for someone standing before the most powerful warrior race in the galaxy," Arena said, folding her arms across her chest. "Do you not fear us?" David shrugged casually, as though he were discussing the weather. "I've seen a lot in my time. Fear doesn't change." Anything Sora stepped forward, her eyes flashing with anger. "You speak too boldly for a man whose people are at our mercy." She growled and showed respect before we showed you how truly insignificant you are. David's lips quirked into a slight smile. Respect is earned, not demanded by the crowd. Still watching from a safe distance, gasped at words. The Valkyra were renowned for their ruthlessness, and no one expected a human, especially an ordinary one, to talk back to them. Yet David seemed unfazed by the towering warriors before him, and his words carried a weight that unsettled Arena. "If only slightly you dare to challenge us," Arena asked, her voice cold but edged with curiosity. "Do you not realize what we could do to your world?" "I realize it," David said, his voice unwavering, "but I also know that strength isn't just about size or power. It's about... I've faced enemies before, and I've learned one thing. If you don't stand your ground, you've already lost." Arena was silent for a moment. Considering his words, there was something undeniably different about him. He was no ordinary human. There was strength in his stance, a quiet confidence that resonated with her on a deeper level. She had never met a being from such a primitive world who displayed such fearlessness in the face of overwhelming odds. Sora, however, was less impressed. "Shall we crush him, General?" She asked, her tone mocking show these earthlings what happens when they forget their place. But Arena shook her head, raising her hand to stop Sora. "No, he interested me." Sora blinked and surprised this earthling. "He is nothing." Arena's gaze remained locked on David, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Perhaps, but I want to know what this one is capable of for the crowd," murmured, confused by Arena's unexpected interest. David remained calm, but even he could sense the shifting dynamics in the air. The tension was no longer purely about fear or dominance. Arena wasn't just mocking him, she was testing him. She stepped closer, her imposing figure towering over him. "Tell me, David Kane," she said slowly, her voice lowering to a more personal tone. "Why should I not simply take your world and leave it in ruins?" David held her gaze. "Because it's not as weak as you think." Sora scoffed, but Arena raised her hand again, silencing her. She studied David for a long moment, and then made an unexpected move. She extended her arm toward him, offering him a challenge. "Prove it," she said. David glanced at her hand, then back into her glowing violet eyes. He could feel the eyes of every Vaki and human on the street watching, waiting to see what he would do. The odds were stacked against him, and yet he wasn't afraid. There was something in Arena's eyes, a spark of mutual respect that hinted at possibilities. He hadn't expected he to reach out and take her hand in that moment. Something shifted. The balance of power between the Valkyra and Earth was no longer a simple game of dominance. Arena had found a human who intrigued her, and who had the potential to challenge her preconceptions. As she released David's hand, she turned to Sora, and her soldiers held your positions. She commanded Wek, "See if this planet is truly as weak as we thought." And with that, the Valkyra, who had arrived with mockery in their hearts, now found themselves on the verge of something far more complex, an encounter that would forever change the way they saw Earth and its people. The atmosphere was electric. The heart of New York City had transformed into an arena of anticipation. Skyscrapers towered, like silent spectators, over the streets below, where a circle had formed around General Arena and David Kane. The crowd, a mix of fear and awe, watched as the imposing Valkyra leader faced off against the unassuming earthling who had dared to stand his ground. Arena's violet eyes assessed David with a mixture of curiosity and challenge. "You possess courage, unusual for your species," she remarked, her voice resonating with both admiration and condescension. but courage without strength is meaningless. David met her gaze. Steadily, strength comes in many forms. He replied, "It's not just about physical power." Sora, observing from the sidelines, clenched her fists. "This is a waste of time. Let me dispatch him and remind these humans of their place." Arena raised a hand to silence her. "No, Sora. This one has piqued my interest. I will handle this myself." The Valkyra warriors formed a perimeter, their towering forms, creating an imposing barrier between the duelists and the crowd. Military personnel who had arrived on the scene held their positions, unsure of how to proceed. Orders crackled over radios, but no one dared to interfere. Arena stepped forward. The ground seemed to tremble under her weight. She wore armor made of an iridescent material unknown to Earth, which moved like liquid silver, yet was as strong as any metal known to man. At her side hung an energy blade, its hilt adorned with intricate alien symbols. "Do you wish to reconsider?" Arena asked, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Yield now, and I may spare you the humiliation." David shook his head. "I've never backed down from a challenge." He was unarmed, but years of training had honed his body into a weapon as a former Special Forces. Operative David had faced enemies of all kinds, but this was different. He was up against an alien warrior with abilities beyond human comprehension. Still, he felt a strange calm settle over him. Arena drew her energy. Blade, the weapon, ignited with a sharp hiss, a shimmering blade of pure energy extending from the hilt. Its light cast a glow over her face, highlighting her determined expression very well. She said, "Let us begin." Without warning, Arena surged forward. Her movements were a blur faster than any human could naturally perceive, yet David reacted instinctively, years of combat experience guiding him. He sidestepped her initial strike, the energy blade slicing through the air. Where he had stood moments before the crowd, gasping cameras from news crews captured the astonishing scene broadcasting. It lives around. The world people watched from their homes, bars, and public squares, eyes glued to screens. As the impossible unfolded before them, Arena spun gracefully, bringing her blade around in a sweeping arc. David ducked, feeling the heat of the blade as it passed overhead. He retaliated with a swift kick aimed at her midsection. His foot connected with her armor, the impact jarring but ineffective. She raised an eyebrow, impressive reflexes. She admitted, "But you'll need more than that." Arena intensified her assault. Launching a series of rapid strikes, David evaded, each one with a combination of agility and anticipation. He noticed that while she was incredibly fast and strong, her fighting style was direct. Perhaps overconfident, as the duel continued, David began to adapt. He looked for patterns in her movements. Timing in her attacks, he realized that if he could predict her next move, he might find an opening. Arena feinted to the left before swinging to the right, as David anticipated, the maneuver stepping inside her guard. Seizing the moment, he delivered a powerful elbow, strike to her shoulder joint, aiming for a gap in her arm armor. The impact made Arena stumble back a step. Surprise flashed across her face. No one had ever managed to land a blow on her in close combat, let alone a human. "You're full of surprises," she remarked, her tone tinged with genuine respect. Likewise, David replied, breathing steadily around them. The Valkyra warriors exchanged uncertain glances. Sora's expression darkened. "General, this has gone on long enough," she called out. "Allow me to assist Arena," in shooting her a sharp look. "Stand down, Sora. This is my fight." Resuming her focus on David Arena, she adjusted her stance. She recognized that brute force would not suffice. This human required a different approach. She deactivated her energy blade, much to everyone's astonishment. A fair fight. She declared, setting the hilt aside. "No weapons." David nodded, appreciating the gesture. They circled each other, each assessing the other's weaknesses. Arena made the first move, launching a swift kick aimed at David's torso. He blocked it with his forearm, the force sending a shock wave up his arm. He countered with a jab toward her midsection, which he parried effortlessly. The exchange intensified. They moved like dancers, each motion fluid and precise. Arena's strength was undeniable, but David's adaptability kept him in the fight. He leveraged his smaller size to his advantage, slipping under her strikes and targeting vulnerable spots. Minutes felt like hours as the duel wore on sweat, beaded on David's brow, but he maintained his composure. Arena, too, showed signs of exertion, a sheen on her skin, a slight quickening of her breath. "You're holding back," David said between exchanges. Perhaps she admitted, "But so are you." He smiled. "Maybe we're both looking for the same thing." She paused momentarily, lowering her guard. "And what is that understanding?" Arena regarded him thoughtfully. "You fight not just with your body, but with your mind." It's rare. Before she could continue, David seized the opportunity and moved swiftly, closing the distance between them. He executed a sweep, kick aimed at her legs. Caught off guard, Arena stumbled, losing her balance. She recovered quickly, but found David's fist stopping inches from her face. A cold gasp rose from the crowd. The Viro warriors tensed, unsure of how to react. David withdrew his hand, stepping back to give her space yield. He asked softly, and Arena's eyes widened, not in anger, but in something resembling admiration. She let out a soft laugh. "No one has ever brought me to a standstill." She confessed. "First time for everything," he replied. She straightened, a newfound respect evident in her gaze. "You are a remarkable warrior, David. Can your species be more than we anticipated?" Sora approached cautiously. "General, this is highly irregular. We cannot silence Arena with a glance enough." "Sora, this duel has served its purpose." Turning back to David, she extended her hand in a universal gesture of respect. "You have earned my acknowledgement." He accepted her hand, their grips firm, "and you have mine." The tension in the air dissipated, replaced by a sense of mutual recognition. The crowd began to cheer, the sound growing louder as the realization of what had transpired sank in around the world. Viewers celebrated the unexpected outcome. A human standing as an equal with an alien warrior. Arena released his hand and addressed both the Valkyra and the humans present. "Today we have learned that strength is not solely measured by might, but also by spirit and resolve. We came here believing you were weak, but we see now that you possess qualities worthy of respect." Sora looked conflicted, but ultimately deferred to her general's judgment. The other Valkyra murmured among themselves, some nodding in agreement, and David took a step forward. "Perhaps there's more. We can learn from each other." Arena considered his words. "Perhaps there is much about your world that intrigues me at that moment." A high-ranking military officer stepped forward from the human side on behalf of Earth. "We extend an invitation for bilateral diplomatic relations," he said cautiously. Arena glanced at David, then back at the officer. "Diplomacy was not our initial intent," she admitted, "but circumstances have changed." Sora interjected. "General, our protocols will be revised." Arena stated firmly, "Prepare to communicate. A high command informs them that Earth is not to be engaged militarily." Sora bowed her head, accepting the order as you commanded. The atmosphere shifted. Further hope, replacing fear. Arena turned to David once more. "It seems our encounter has altered the course of events." He smiled for the better. "I hope." She returned the smile subtly. "I believe so." As the Valkyra began to regroup, preparations were made for formal discussions. Temporary communication channels were established between the Valkyra ship and Earth's leaders. Scientists and diplomats eagerly awaited the chance to engage with the alien visitors as the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the city. The day's events had changed. Everything humanity had not only made first contact with an advanced alien race, but had also earned their respect before returning to the Valoria arena and speaking privately with David. "You have shown me that even the smallest voice can echo loudly." He nodded. "And you've shown me that even the mightiest warriors can seek understanding over conquest." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "Perhaps there is hope for a future where our peoples stand together, one step at a time," he replied. She extended her hand once more. "Until we meet again, David Kane." He shook her hand warmly. "Safe travels, General ARA." And with that she joined her warriors as they ascended the ramp back into their ship. The Valora began to rise its engines, humming softly as the crowd watched in silence, a mix of relief and wonder on their faces as the ship vanished into the sky. David stood among his fellow humans, a quiet hero who had changed the fate of his world, not with weapons but with courage and respect. The departure of the Valoria left the city in an eerie silence, as if the entire world were collectively holding its breath. The massive ship had ascended beyond the atmosphere, vanishing from sight, but the memory of the V's presence lingered on the streets of New York as people slowly emerged from their hiding places. Unsure of what to do now that the impossible encounter had ended, David Kane stood in the middle of the street, still feeling the weight of everything that had just transpired. He had faced down one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and to tell the tale. More than that, he had earned her respect. The memory of Arena's violet eyes, meeting his just before they parted, lingered. In his mind, she was no ordinary enemy. In fact, she wasn't an enemy at all anymore. Around him, military personnel and law enforcement officers moved quickly to secure the area. Sirens wailed in the distance, and helicopters hovered above, keeping watch. David could see groups of government officials and scientists already descending on the scene, eager to piece together what had just happened. But David knew that this was only the beginning. An officer approached him, looking dazed but composed. "David Kane, sir. The president has requested an immediate briefing. You need to come with us." David nodded, though his mind was still spinning from the encounter, as he followed the officer to a waiting convoy. He caught one last glimpse of the sky, wondering if the Valkyra were still up there watching hours later. David found himself standing in the Oval Office. The weight of the situation was beginning to sink in for the President of the United States, along with several top military officials and advisors seated around him, listening intently as David recounted every detail of his duel with General Arena. The air in the room was thick with tension. "So you're telling me that these Vaki decided not to invade because you won some kind of fight?" one of the generals asked skeptically. "It wasn't about winning," David replied calmly. "It was about proving that Earth isn't as weak as they thought. Arena was looking for a war. She was looking to test us to see if we were worth her time." The president leaned forward, his hands clasped together on the desk. "And what do you believe? Do you think this General Arena can be trusted?" David paused, considering the question carefully. "Yes," he said. "Finally, I do. She may be a warrior, but she's not reckless. She respects strength, and she respects those who stand up for themselves. If we approach them with respect and show them that we're willing to cooperate, I think we can avoid any conflict." A murmur rippled through the room as the advisors exchanged glances. The idea of negotiating with an alien race was both thrilling and terrifying. Earth had never been in a situation like this before. The president nodded, absorbing the information. "And you think we should initiate formal diplomacy with these Valkyra?" "I think it's our best chance," David replied. "They didn't come here to destroy us. If we handled this right, we might have an opportunity to form an alliance, one that could change the future of our world." The president sat back in his chair, deep in thought. Finally, he looked up. "Very well. We'll proceed cautiously. I want our top diplomats working on this immediately, David." You've done an incredible service for your country and for the world. We'll need you to remain closely involved in these discussions." David nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what his role would be going forward. He had never imagined that one day he'd be negotiating peace with alien warriors, but the world had changed in a matter of hours. Nothing felt certain anymore as the meeting adjourned. David walked out of the Oval Office feeling a mixture of exhaustion and excitement outside the White House. The media frenzy was already in full swing. Reporters clamored for information, eager to hear every detail about the first confirmed encounter with extraterrestrial life, but David was too drained to pay them much attention. All he wanted was some quiet. Far above Earth, aboard the Valoria General Arena, stood before a holographic display. Her eyes focused on the image of Earth below. She had returned to her command post, but her thoughts were still on the man she had faced earlier that day, David Kane. In all her years of conquest and battle, no one had ever made her question her assumptions. The way he had Sora approached from behind her expression was tense. "The High Command has received our report, General. They are perplexed by your decision to halt the invasion." Arena turned slowly, her face calm but firm. Perplexed, Sora nodded. "They do not understand why you would choose diplomacy over dominance. Some members of the Council are concerned that Earth may not be worthy of our time." Arena's gaze hardened. "Then they are fools. Earth is more than it appears. I have seen something in its people, in their will to survive, their resilience. They are not like the other species we have encountered." Sora hesitated. "Do you truly believe they could be valuable allies?" Arena considered this for a moment. "Perhaps they have strength that goes beyond physical power. If they can harness that strength, they may become a force worth aligning with the Valkyra, who have ruled through conquest for centuries. But perhaps it is time we sought out partnerships instead of enemies." Sora's brow furrowed. "The Council may resist such ideas. Let them say coolly, 'I will not ignore what I have learned here. Earth has potential, and I intend to see what that potential holds.'" There was a long silence between them before Sora finally spoke again. "What of this human David Kane? You seem particularly interested in him." Arena's expression softened slightly, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "He is different. He is a warrior in his own way, though not in the way we expected. He understands strength, not as brute force, but as determination and adaptability. I believe he may be the key to understanding Earth." Sora looked skeptical, but did not argue. "What will our next move be?" "We will return to Thaler and report to the Council. Then we will open formal channels with Earth's leaders. This is no longer a conquest, Sora. This is the beginning of something new days later, back on Earth." David Kane found himself standing in front of an international delegation. Representatives from the United Nations, heads of state, and scientists from every corner of the globe had gathered to discuss. The Valkyra David had been asked to speak, not as a soldier, but as a diplomat, the man who had faced down an alien general and brokered peace. "The world is watching," one of the diplomats said to him as they prepared for the session. "You've become a symbol of hope for billions." David smiled, though the weight of those words was not lost on him. "I didn't do this alone," he said quietly. "We all have a part to play in what comes next." As the session began, David stood before the assembly, feeling the eyes of the world upon him. The Valkyra had not returned since their departure, but communication channels had been established. The first steps toward diplomacy had been taken, and humanity now stood on the threshold of a new era, one filled with possibility, but also uncertainty. "The Vaki are not our enemies." David began his voice, steady and clear. "They are warriors, yes, but they are also beings capable of reason and respect. They came here expecting to find weakness, but what they found was resilience, and because of that, We have an opportunity to forge a future not defined by fear, but by cooperation. The room was silent, every word hanging in the air as we moved forward. We must remember that strength isn't just about power. It's about standing together and finding common ground, even when the odds seem insurmountable. The Vaki have given us a chance, and it's up to us to make the most of it. Applause erupted from the assembly. David stepped back, the weight of the moment finally lifting from his shoulders. He had no way of knowing what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. Earth was no longer alone in the universe. As the applause continued, David allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. His eyes drifted upward toward the sky, where he imagined the valley watching from their distant home world. He wondered if somewhere Arena was looking back at Earth with the same sense of curiosity and hope. Far beyond the stars, aboard the Valora General Arena, stood on the command deck, gazing at a holographic image of Earth. She smiled faintly in her thoughts, returning to the day she had met David Kane until we met again. She whispered softly. The ship's engines roared to life, and the Valkyra vessel shot forward into the infinite expanse of space, leaving Earth behind but not forgotten.